Alright, welcome back. So last time I talked about editing SPD files and how to use this SPD emulator to edit only the sprites without having to include the entire SPD in your mod. And this video is actually going to be very similar to that last one, because this time we're going to talk about PAK, which is an archive format that also has its own emulator, and it works in very much the same way. Here's a bunch of different examples of PAK files that you can find in the game. Let me go and open this one up in Amicitia. So just like we did with SPD, you can open it up and see what's inside. So this one has a bunch of different data tables inside. These are mostly just stats for different things like battles, personas, enemies, stuff like that. And I'll discuss how to edit those in a different video. But just so you know, just like with SPD, you can right-click whichever file and export it. And that's how you can isolate just that single file from the PAK. You can also right-click and choose Replace, so once you've made any edits to the file, you can then save the entire PAK with those changes. I like to use higawari.pak as an example, because if you open that one up in Amicitia, you'll see that that one actually has an SPD contained inside of it. So let's say that I want to edit this knife texture here. I could export the texture from the SPD just like in the previous video and edit the image in paint.net and make any changes I want. So I think what I'll do is I'll replace the knife image here with this pizza cutter, and I'll just put that right where the pizza cutter goes, and I'll delete the old one underneath it using a different layer, and let me save this as a PNG. Now we have our edited sprite sheet that now has the pizza cutter instead of the regular knife. Now back in Amicitia, I'll right click and I'll choose Replace, and then I'll choose that edited image. And just like in the previous video, if you go to the top here, it'll refresh the contents. Then you can go back down and see your changes. So here is the new knife that we added, and we can save both this SPD and the PAK it's contained in if we just go to Save As and choose a new destination for it. We got the higawari.pak from this calendar folder in that encpk that we extracted back in part 2 of the playlist. In our mod, we also have to create a folder called calendar, and we can save our edited higawari.pak into that calendar folder. So now if I start the game, we should see that the pizza cutter has been replaced. So yeah, editing PAK files is just as straightforward as editing SPD was, but you probably know the drill by now. We're not quite done yet, because we still haven't discussed how to emulate the PAK file. So now we can get rid of this calendar folder inside of our P5R Essentials folder, and instead we can go into our F-emulator folder and create a PAK folder there. And inside that, just like we did with SPD, we also have to create the path leading up to our emulated file. So before we can make our higawari.pak folder, we have to create a calendar folder. And then inside that we can make the folder named after our emulated PAK. So higawari.pak. And inside that, you could just put the emulated SPD. And that should work just as well as the previous method. But this way we're only including that singular file, which will be really useful if we ever have to modify a PAK that has multiple files in it, and we want to provide the best compatibility with other mods when it comes to merging those files. Alright, so that's a pretty good demonstration of how to do that with the PAK emulator, but if you remember the previous video, there's also advantages to emulating SPD as well. And we're not really doing that here since we still have this full 28 megabyte SPD. It's got all of the sprites rather than just the pizza cutter image that we changed. So if we want to be able to take advantage of both the SPD emulator and the PAK emulator, here's how you would do that. So once again, just like in the previous video, I'm going to drag my Higawari common SPD that we extracted from the PAK onto the SPD disassembler from our PersonaSpriteTools folder. And this should just give you all of the sprites. Go inside there, and here is our knife. I'm going to move those outside of the folder, and then we can delete both of these now. So let me go into the F-emulator folder, and inside the SPD folder, let's create a calendar folder. And inside of that, instead of putting the name of the SPD, I'm going to put the name of the PAK here. so higawari.PAK. And inside of that is where I'll put the name of the SPD, so higawaricommon.spd. That's because the SPD is found inside of the PAK. And then I'll paste the sprite inside here. But we're not quite done yet, because in order for this to work, we also have to create a dummy SPD. What I mean by that is if you go back out and go into the PAK emulator of our mod, so PAK and then calendar, and then higawari.PAK, you'll see that it's empty right now because a little bit ago I deleted the actual SPD. But since we're emulating the SPD inside the PAK, we need to put something here. So I'm going to right click and create a new text document, and make sure that you can see the text extension here, because if you can't, then you'll have to go into your Windows settings and change the setting that says show extensions. Yeah, you have to change that setting to allow you to see file extensions. You'll see here that I'm not hiding extensions for known file types, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to change this type of extension. So this will now be called higawaricommon.spd. And Windows will tell you this thing about changing the file extension, but you can just click yes and not worry about that. So now we have a 0-byte SPD here, but it's not actually an SPD, it's still just an empty text file, but because we changed the extension, it's going to allow us to emulate the SPD within our emulated PAK file. Okay, so now it's time to launch the game and see if that worked, which I believe it should. And would you look at that, it did indeed work. And all we have in our mod for that now is just the single edited sprite that doesn't take up very much space, as opposed to having the entire SPD or the entire PAK. And we achieved that by using a dummy SPD in the PAK emulator folder. So this is the most efficient way to handle both PAK emulation and SPD emulation whenever there's an SPD present inside of a PAK. You won't run into that very often, but I thought it would be worth mentioning just to cover all our bases here, so that you know how to handle absolutely every situation that you might come across. Alright, I think that does it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to move on to talking about sound editing, which should be pretty exciting. And then sometime after that, we'll finally start talking about editing custom models, which is going to be a pretty big one. So thank you for watching, and be sure to continue with the playlist if more of this interests you, and hopefully I'll see you there.